Hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I am Bruce.
Today we've got a little deck that is one of my favorites of yours.
It's the same size as all my other decks.
Oh, good. Otherwise you'd be cheating. Unlike 60 card, we have a deck sized. Anyway, it's episode 3 of this season, so that means Decktail. Man, I am such on a roll today. Today we're going to talk about Bruce's deck for Conspiracy 1.
Yeah.
Marchesa, the Black Rose, for Red, Black, Blue 1. So 4 mana. 3/3, legendary creature, Human Wizard. Interesting. Did not know she was a wizard.
Yes, she is.
She's got Dethrone, and other. She says other creatures you control have Dethrone. Dethrone means whenever this creature attacks the player with the highest life total, or the most life, or tied for most life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then the third line of text on this crowded card.
Yes.
Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So it synergizes fairly well with itself, giving things +1/+1 counters, and then caring about when things with +1/+1 counters die.
Right. Okay, so the fact that it has Dethrone is cute, because then you can get +1/+1 counters on it, but practically speaking, Dethrone and that all of your other creatures have Dethrone really plays a somewhat small role in the way this deck works. It used to play a much bigger role as, the key way to get counters onto creatures. What I've found is that there are just too many times when the person that you have to attack to get the counters can end up killing all of your creatures. So you attack with your creatures to get a counter on them, and then they just immediately die. And a lot of times, that's not what you're looking for. And I appreciate they have the counter, so they're going to come back. But oftentimes, you don't want that to happen that quickly. You want them to have the counter on it, and then be able to save them to a certain point in the game when they would then come around. And a lot of times, you just want them with a counter on it as a way to discourage others from casting mass removal, because your stuff's coming back, and most everybody else's stuff is not. So Dethrone had a bigger role. It's definitely gone down a bit. However, there are definitely cards in here that still look at Dethrone, and a lot of creatures that sort of manage that aspect at least a little bit. More importantly for this deck, though, is that last ability, which lets you loop your creatures back in. So sometimes you do get lucky, and there's an opening. So not only do you get to swing in for a little bit of extra damage, but you get the +1/+1 counter on it when you want it. So it's not useless, but it's definitely not what the entire deck is featured around. So
let's start with your section about +1/+1 counters.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
I think it's the most readily available for understanding the deck, even if, as we'll see, a lot of these, the whole deck, essentially, I'd say 80% of the non-land cards are trying to get +1s on things. So
right. So I've got a section dedicated to it, which is just +1/+1 counters. Essentially, these are the cards that have a direct interaction with this aspect of it. In here, specifically, Unspeakable Symbol, Dragon Blood are the two that sort of focus and push the getting +1/+1 counters on other creatures. So Dragon Blood is a 3-mana artifact, and for 3 and tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And no one is going to tell you that that's the best deal, because that's an expensive way to get a +1/+1 counter on a creature. And it taps, so you can only do it to one creature per turn. However, it does fit, and quite often I will want to have Dragon Blood there, if for no other reason than to get a counter onto Marchesa. because
especially right before a board wipe. Yeah.
right. So if you can threaten it, you can save her, and as long as it just means you're not going to have to pay that commander tax over and over again, which is just going to get more and more expensive. Whereas Dragon Blood, I mean, sure, it costs 3 to get the counter, but you do get the loop, and she's right back in again without having to pay, 6 to get her out a second time. So I like that one. The Unspeakable Symbol it's an enchantment. It's 1 black. The card's out of Scourge. It says pay 3 life is the cost, and then put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So you can pay the 3 life for as many creatures as you have, or you can put it on your opponent's creatures if you really want to. But it does allow you to hit a lot of creatures in one go. And also, in a sort of a subtle nod to the Dethrone, if you happen to be the one with the highest life total, you can use this as a way to put yourself down to the second highest life total, and then you can use the Dethrone mechanic with Marchesa to swing at whoever is the new person at the top of the life total heap. So,
yeah.
So yeah, the 3 life is far less of a downside with this deck than it seems to be otherwise. So
I will also note that Necropolis Regent does an excellent job putting +1/+1 counters on other creatures, but it's very expensive mana-wise and requires you to get through. I love that card to death, but it is it's a kill on sight type of thing. Just because people see it and they're like, "Oh, it's a 6/5 with flying for 6."
Right. I mean,
for those who don't know, it says whenever any creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So it makes a lot of counters, and maybe this deck isn't necessarily trying to make a lot of counters, but it does do that.
Right, and there are definitely some cards in the deck. I'm looking at you, Triskelion, in particular, that do love to get a ton of counters on them. But yeah, a lot of times it's just the one. But I mean, there are plenty of others as well. I mean, Mindless Automaton is another creature that definitely would like as many counters as you can get. I
think that card's excellent for this deck. I mean, I feel like it gets so underplayed in general. Mindless Automaton,
right?
But
and it's really easy in a deck like this to see it as sort of a non-bow, because when you remove 2 counters from it, you draw a card. Well, if those are the last 2 counters on it, then it dies because it's a 0/0. Well, then it dies without a counter on it, and then it can't come back. So you don't get that. You don't get the recursion ability from Marchesa. So you end up trying to get it set up with at least 1 counter still sitting on it, and then you find yourself intentionally attacking into situations or using it as that token blocker and hoping somebody will just destroy it for you.
You attack with it to get the Dethrone trigger, you get a 3rd counter on it, and then before damage goes through, you draw a card.
Right.
And it dies and it comes back. It's great.
Yeah.
This deck is, from what I remember, I haven't played against this deck in a while.
Yeah.
From what I remember, this deck is it's hard to figure out where to focus, because obviously you don't always want to ruin somebody's day by just continually going after their commander. But this commander is the linchpin on this deck. It's fantastic.
I mean, without Marchesa, there are a lot of cards in the deck that they have entered the battlefield triggers, they go off, and then nothing happens, because the whole point is that there are a lot of cards in the deck that really do require Marchesa as a way to recur them back out. I mean, even something as basic as Solemn Simulacrum, it doesn't have a way to recur itself. There are other cards, though, that can recur themselves. They just, but they're less. They tend to be a little less exciting. So, but yeah, I mean, if you're in a particularly focused group, or your game is going particularly well, it certainly doesn't take too long for your opponents to start attempting to work over Marchesa and make sure that you're paying a whole lot of mana for Marchesa to be out there. Because you're right, it is the linchpin of the deck.
Let's move on over to you've got a whole category here for stealing people's creatures, and it took me until we were recording to figure out why it was such a big thing. Because I'm like, oh, like of course, like stealing people's creatures is a very red and blue thing to do, but I forgot that this says whenever a creature you control dies, it comes back under your control.
Yeah.
And a lot of these are until end of turn, so if you have a sack outlet or a way to kill it while it's under your control, and it has a +1/+1 counter on it, then it's going to just come back to your play, right?
Right. I mean, in this group, Mark of Mutiny is probably the one that best fits the theme, just because
absolutely.
It gives it a +1/+1 counter, so you don't even have to do any extra work. However, it's just so easy so many times to just whether it's Unspeakable Symbol, Dragon Blood, something else, you've managed to move counters from one creature to a next, however you've got it set up. And on top of that, sometimes you just take their creature. And you're just going to take it for the turn. You want it out of the way. You want to swing with it. The other benefit with having this many, there are 8 cards in that will steal opponents' creatures. The other benefit is just that sometimes I think this deck gets a little outgunned. The creatures that are in the deck, they tend to do things that are cute as opposed to backbreaking. So sometimes you're left relying on an opponent. It's like, I see you have brought this ridiculous creature to the board, which will be the end of us all. May I borrow that permanently for the rest of the game? Thank you very much.
Yeah. For just a quick overlook of a lot of these creatures, I feel like a lot of them, like you said, are just kind of cute. They do a thing when they enter, or they do a thing if you remove a counter, which is like, great. Or it has persist, so then when it comes back with a -1/-1 counter, and then you attack with it to dethrone it to then take away that -1. So you've got your handful of persist, which is, like you said, cute.
Mm-hmm.
But like a lot of those do not powerful things, but like they do things that are impactful. I think like you take a look at Glenelendra Archmage, 3 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer, blue sack it to counter target non-creature spell, persist. So you counter a thing, it comes back with a -1/-1 counter on it. You can counter another thing eventually, or if you attack with it and dethrone it, or give it a +1 in any way, it negates that -1.
Right.
I'm so in love with this deck because of the little interactions like that. I mean, you look at a lot of Marchesa decks, I'm sure they're full of things like this, but it is the little choices that really bring this deck together for me.
Well, I look at this at Marchesa, and just the way this deck is set up to run, there are so many options. Like, this isn't one of these decks where your commander does this thing, so so there are 10 cards that absolutely should be in the deck, and then you can go through and list off those cards because they're essential to. They work so well with the commander. With this deck, or with this particular commander, it just feels like there's a lot of cards that do these little interactions that, honestly, I feel like I could take out half of the creatures in the deck or just replace them with other creatures that have different triggers. So I feel like there's a lot of variety to be had with Marchesa. If ever there was a deck list which can get you started, but honestly, you can pull a lot of these cards and replace them with your own favorites.
Oh, absolutely. Especially where, I don't think this deck has been updated in a number of years.
Not for a long time. I added.
So
I added Arcane Signet. Like, that was the most recent addition. And that was when Arcane Signet came out. So
which was what, Eldraine?
I don't remember. It's been years since this deck has been updated. So
I like too that the general gist of this deck, whether it's you've got your counter in Glenelendra Archmage, or you've got your card draw, or your permanent removal. A majority of them are based in creature spells. I mean, like, they're creatures with abilities that let you do these things.
Yeah.
Because they're easy to protect with this commander. It's fascinating.
Yeah, you just need a counter, and there's just so many easy ways to just add a counter to things. So,
yeah.
And there's, for that matter, there's so many cards that you can that with counters will do ridiculous things. One that has been featured in a few of our games is Deathbringer Thoktar.
Love that card.
And in this deck, he's outrageous.
Absolutely.
So just for those who don't know, the Thoktar it costs 4 generic, 1 black, 1 red. For a 3/3 creature, it's a zombie beast. Do not worry about the fact that this is a 3/3. Whenever another
looks a lot bigger than a 3/3.
Oh yeah, and he usually and it usually is. Whenever another creature dies, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Deathbringer Thoktar. So the Deathbringer brings its own +1/+1 counters, so that whenever it's being killed, it almost invariably does come back as long as Marchesa's out there. The second ability is remove a +1/+1 counter from the Thoktar. Deathbringer Thoktar deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So quite often what happens with the Thoktar is that you get the machine gun effect. Take that counter off to do 1 point of damage to a 1/1 creature. And then when that creature dies, you get another counter, and then you remove that one to 2. And basically you machine gun through through all of the 1/1s on the board. And your net result is, at the end of all that, you have a Thoktar with a +1/+1 counter on it. So it's rare, honestly, that I use it to go after any bigger creature, unless it's been sitting on the battlefield long enough that it's accumulating +1/+1 counters. And
right.
Usually, when it gets to that point, then I'm looking to start to throw them at somebody's head. So, because
it's like exactly what you'd want, like a walking ballista to do in this deck, which is to say, reload itself.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
it's fantastic.
Oh yeah, it's just wonderful. Honestly, the funny part is, like, Triskelion does a similar thing, but not as good, because you get the 3 counters immediately, and you can use all 3 at once. So you can just do the 3 damage. The only problem with the Triskelion is that it's a 1/1 creature. I would prefer to have something that was a 1/1 creature, because there's still 1 counter sitting on it, and then find a way to cycle that out. But
there's a very long, not necessarily infinite combo here, but like with Triskelion, you take 2 off to do 2 damage to itself, and then you get Blood Artist trigger or whatever, comes back at the end of the next end step,
right,
which is great. But that seems like a slow burn.
Yeah, it can be it churns a little bit. The other card that I was thinking about particularly was Thraxamundar. Another truly old school card. For 4 blue, black, and a red, you get a 6/6 with haste, and whenever it attacks, defending player sacks a creature. Whenever a player sacrifices a creature, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Thraxamundar. So generally, it comes out, you immediately attack an opponent, and then that person sacrifices a creature. Thraxamundar gets a +1/+1 counter, becomes a 7/7, and then oftentimes is chump blocked.
But at least has the +1 on it.
Right. And now that it's got the +1 on it, you're not that concerned about the rest of it. So for whatever reason, I just can never seem to draw that card. So
it is one of 99.
Yes.
I think too, along the same kind of lines, the one that catches my eye is Grimgrin, Corpseborn, 3 blue, black for 5/5. It enters the battlefield tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step. And you can sacrifice a creature. So this is a nice sack outlet for whatever you need. And you untap it to put a +1/+1 counter on Grimgrin. And then whenever Grimgrin attacks, destroy target creature defending player controls, then put a +1/+1 on Grimgrin. So a very similar idea with Thraxamundar. A little bit easier to cast.
Right.
But a little slower because obviously it doesn't have haste and obviously it comes in tapped. But it does the sack outlet, which is nice.
Right. And there are a handful of cards that will do this, that play the role of the sack outlet. So cards like Triskelion, so that way you don't have to use up the last counter to, or if you've got a Solemn Simulacrum and you can't find an opponent that's willing to accommodate you, you can sack the Solemn Simulacrum. One of the other ones that I kind of wanted to mention was Sage of Fables. Talking about a card that is quiet and doesn't really seem to do a whole lot. Sage of Fables it costs 2 and a blue. It's a Merfolk wizard, and it's a 2/2 creature. And it says each other wizard creature you control comes into play with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So as long as Sage of Fables is out, every time you cast Marchesa, it's coming with a +1 right off the bat. And it isn't just the 2 of them that are wizards, and I'm trying to remember.
You've got Glenelendra Archmage, you've got Baron, you've got Puppeteer Clique, and Cytoplast Manipulator, which I want to talk about after this.
Sure. So there's a handful of cards that'll get you or that get a benefit from the Sage of Fables, and I wouldn't by any stretch suggest that this is a wizard-themed deck. However...
You mean 6 isn't...
I don't think 6 wizards counts as a wizard theme, but it is enough to
also
make this...
Torian Mauler.
But
that's getting +1. That's getting +1s anyway.
Right. However, with Torian Mauler, the Sage of Fables' next ability is spend 2, remove a counter from a creature you control. Not even necessarily a wizard. And then you get to draw a card. So spend 2 mana, draw a card, and usually the downside is negligible at best. Because, obviously you're not pulling the last +1/+1 counter off of one of your wizards or any other creature without being really desperate for it. So,
especially Mindless Automaton, Torian Mauler, Triskelion. These cards that we've already been talking about that either already come with +1s or it's inevitable for them to end up getting them.
Right. And Cytoplast Manipulator. It's another wizard, and it comes in with 2 +1/+1 counters.
Oh, yeah.
So, just like that, already you're getting, you get that kind of benefit. So it comes in with 2. If Sage of Fables is out, it gets 3, and then you can easily graft one of those onto even an opponent's creature, and then just steal the opponent's creature. There's, it just... This card, the Sage of Fables, seems like it's almost accidentally creating interesting little loops and redundancies in the deck. So
I really like Cytoplast Manipulator. Now that we're onto it,
sure.
It's 2 blue for a 0/0 human wizard mutant, graft 2. And for blue and tap, gain control of target creature with a +1/+1 counter on it as long as Cytoplast Manipulator remains in play. Now, until you were just explaining this, I didn't realize that graft let you put things on your opponent's creatures, which is great. But also, what are the chances that, a lot of decks play with +1/+1 counters? So, even without that, it is very possible that somebody's creature is going to get a +1/+1 counter on it. And then if you look back to what we were talking about earlier, you take control of somebody's creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. It has a +1/+1 counter on it, and then if somebody tries to kill it, it's going to be under your control when it dies. So then you get it back at the end of the end step without the Cytoplast Manipulator clause. It's amazing.
Right. I mean, so like you said, I mean, with Grim
That card belongs in this deck.
It just does. But again, that's I mean, I mentioned the Sage of Fables and now the Cytoplast Manipulator. I mean, these are narrow cards or cards that you wouldn't normally see in a deck because I mean, without a lot of help, the Cytoplast Manipulator, in theory, can graft one counter onto another creature and then steal it, and then the Manipulator is only a 1/1. So it's a tenuous grasp on an opponent's creature at best. In this deck, that's just not necessarily true. There are, you can get plenty of +1/+1 counters onto the Manipulator, and and once you get control of their creature, you can usually find a way to get a counter on it and get it dead. So
we gotta quickly bring it to break.
Sure.
But when we get back, we'll talk about changes to this deck, especially with updates. And when we get back, we'll talk about that. I
Sounds
gotta.
good.
This episode of Temple of Falspod is brought to you by Brago, King Eternal. I am king, but I am dead. I will be king forever. Nothing's gonna stop me. Nobody's gonna stop me. Nobody know how. I'm gonna be king forever. Oh, hey, Kaya. And now back to you. Hey, we're back.
Hey.
That we got a sponsor, but not for long. We're talking about Bruce's Marchesa, the Black Rose deck from the first. Why can I never remember the name? It's Conspiracy set. Yeah. There we go. Now I know you also have a Queen Marchesa deck, which a much more popular commander, probably because it has the Monarch, like it gives you the Monarch.
Right.
Does Monarch stuff, and you get Assassins and stuff. Also, different color identity. Very interesting. This deck, I have not seen many people play this deck before, but when I've seen you play this deck, it can be very controlling. Obviously, literally with the controlling opponent's creatures thing, but it's not necessarily overpowered or oppressive, but it is very okay, Bruce's deck is doing the thing, we gotta stop him, which is amazing. That said, just even scrolling through this deck list, there are cards in here that I'm like, interesting choice. Granted, I've got, the perspective of the past 4 years or so, where this probably was a deck. You probably made this deck before I even started playing Magic in Ixalan era.
Quite probably.
So I'm just this would be good and this would be good. For instance, if you're willing to play with treasures, Impulsive Pilfer would probably be pretty cool in here. It's a red mana for a 1/1, and when it dies, you get a treasure. Obviously, if that gets a +1/+1 before it dies, you get it right back. It's also got Encore, which somewhat relevant, but not super relevant in this. But obviously, it's just ramping at that point. Question I do have is, other than flavorful, actually I don't even know how flavorful it is, Obnixilis of the Black Oath. What was the thought process here, other than just having it and it being black?
I felt like he was a couple of the weak points in the deck was just the lack of a flying creature. And I felt like Obnixilis filled that and was just generally good otherwise. So, there's a number of cards that cause you to lose life, so it's nice to have a couple of cards that are, in the overall are netting you life. So and Obnixilis tends to fit the bill for that. with me. So
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, so for those who don't know, Obnixilis, 3 black for 3 loyalty commander. You +2 to drain your opponents, -2 to make a 5/5 flying and lose 2 life, and then his ult is -8. You get an emblem with 1 and a black, sacrifice a creature, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the sacrificed creature's power, which, I mean, which also, like, is just great because, like, it's comes in with 3 +2, it's 5 +2. You gotta plus it up to 9 to get that ult, which, you know, takes a while, and the payoff isn't amazing.
Yeah.
So I think it's enough of like far enough out there that I don't think people will see it as like, oh, this is game ending, which is great, honestly.
Yeah, there are some people who do, but a lot of
just because
times,
it's a planeswalker,
right? But a lot of times, you know, I'll pay the 5, and then immediately use the -2 to go down to 1 loyalty, just to get the demon out. I'll lose the 2 life, and then everybody's sort of like, oh, okay. And, you know, some people might try and take the opportunity to take him out at that point, but for the most part, it just becomes real obvious. I mean, that ultimate's not happening. I've never tried. I've never tried to get it. This deck doesn't offer any sort of shortcuts to get there, so you really do have to do it +2 at a time, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, so it's going to be turn 10 by the time you finally get there, and then by that point, you really shouldn't be too worried about the card draw, but maybe the life gain.
Right. I mean, for the most part, I'm looking at, you know, giving it +2 when it comes in, and then using the -2 on the next turn and just flipping back and forth. Just looking for a repeatability, and that tends to work out fairly well for Obnixilis. That, and I suspect that it was a card that was available at the time, and I thought it was cool. So,
yeah. So you've got a handful of things that allow you to sacrifice creatures. Most of them you have to pay for. So like Infernal Tribute is black for an enchantment where you can pay 2 and sacrifice a creature to draw a card. Or sacrifice a card.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a creature. Just sacrifice a permanent. A non-token permanent.
Yeah, non-token permanent. So
not treasure.
Right. So, I mean, yeah. Treasure essentially wasn't a thing when I built the deck.
Yeah.
So
turning all your non-token permanents into clues.
Right. I mean, the Infernal Tribute is there to take the creature I've stolen from someone and sacrifice it.
Especially if it has a +1 on it.
Exactly. So, and then the net is, ooh, I get it permanently, and I get to draw a card. Yeah, that's a real downside. You know, I mean, that's just all upside up. Yeah.
I guess that's kind of my question, though, is beyond, you know, I think you've got 4 things that have sacrifice another creature.
Right.
Like, I feel like this deck might need more. Am I wrong? Have you run into issues with that?
Not really. I mean, if I don't have it, find your opponent who is sitting on the throne and attack with your creature. That creature's going to get the +1/+1 counter, and then they're most likely going to get destroyed. Unless, of course, that player wants to just let it through and just take damage. So it becomes a real, you know, becomes kind of difficult for the opponent. They just generally have to block at some point, and which is what I want. I mean, it becomes I think it becomes fairly obvious when I'm swinging in and I just like, you know, I just want him dead. So, you know, you make your choice. You can, you know, destroy him like I want, or take more damage than you want to take. You know.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with either of those options. So if you're not going to kill the creature, all right then, fine. It'll be coming for you again next turn, or whoever happens to be, you know, on top of the heap with life total.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting to even have a deck that is based around +1s that isn't green. And obviously, that is just based on the commander.
Right.
I don't know if you'd want to add green. I feel like it would just muddy the waters. Obviously, there are a lot of good cards that do +1 counters in green. It's like the color for it. But do you ever find that like it's hard to get those +1s?
No.
In these colors?
No. Between the artifacts that can provide the +1/+1 counters and just the number of creatures that get the +1/+1 counter for themselves or can pass it to another opponent, it's rarely an issue. And like I said, when it does become a problem, well, then you start looking at the fact that all your creatures now have dethrone. So I can usually manage to get creatures dead if I want them to. So if I want them to be dead. So
yeah.
What
have you found to be maybe the place that you're thinking of going with this deck in terms of like either taking cards out or putting cards in or just changing it entirely, or are you like fairly satisfied with it?
I'm satisfied with it, but I would like to make a number of changes. All of the ramp is it's all ramp that doesn't really fit theme. I mean, it does the job. I mean, I'm not gonna be taking out Soul Ring anytime soon. But
Black Market works fairly well in this deck.
Right, but I mean, Gem of Becoming, Thran Dynamo, Obelisk of Grixis, they're fine, but they don't fit theme at all. There should be. I should be able to find other creatures, and especially now, like you said, I mean, Red's got a ton of treasure.
Red's got treasure. Red's got a lot of, especially now, a lot of what's it called? Where you get mana out of playing a spell. Rituals.
Right. So between cards that will get me treasure, and when you're talking about a 3-color deck, I would be actively using a lot of that treasure just because it's 3 colors. So you really do want that kind of flexibility. So, like you said, with the Pilfer, and there's a handful of others that would also work well. The deck already has a number of artifacts, so I could push a little bit more of an artifact theme to it.
For sure. I think Kalane, Reclusive Painter, would work astonishingly well in this deck.
Yeah.
Because for every treasure you spend to cast a creature, it gets a +1/+1 for each mana.
Right.
So really it only needs one, so that it gets into the cycle of dying and coming back and dying and coming back.
Right.
But I mean, yeah. I mean, it's definitely a deck where I think I'm looking at it and I'm having a hard time trying to be like, trying to think critically of what it needs more of. And I think we've touched on certain things throughout the episode where, like you just said, ramp or creatures. Like it could have like a bigger high end.
Yeah.
You've got plenty of things that do cute stuff. And some of them are super valuable. I think a lot of the utility creatures, especially, I think do like really good things.
Yeah.
Even if you just keep recurring Solemn over and over again, getting that +1 on it and getting it back out there, like you're generating advantage that is just by having things die. And I love that about Black, and to have it in red and blue as well is amazing. So it's like it's hard to look at a lot of these cards and be like, maybe not, but I think it fits into very clearly one of maybe 3 categories. We've got the creatures that do things when they enter or when they leave. You've got things that try to get things that got stuck in the graveyard back out of the graveyard, and then you've got things that want to take your opponent's things to then get them stuck in your loop.
Right.
So that you can play with all the cards.
Right.
I can really see this deck having a large board state and never really giving it up, or making it very difficult to give it up. Because, I mean, even, board wipes, if it's a board wipe that you weren't ready for, you have Glen Elendra Archmage. Like, you can just counter it.
Right.
It's very protected, and it's very nice.
I think something else that I was looking at as far as that needs to be adjusted. When I built the deck, I was running into a ton of artifacts. And usually I do not bother with any sort of artifact destruction package. I try and generally include that with a removal. But with this particular deck, I've got 6 pieces of artifact removal, which is probably a little heavy considering none of them are, well, with the exception of Vandal Blast, none of them are going to wipe out an opponent's stash of treasure. These are there to go after the artifacts that are actually causing an issue. But I think that it wouldn't be that hard to trim that down a little bit, or to at least make it a little more, make it so it fits the theme a little more. I mean, Sting Moggy is cute, and it does work on theme, but like some of the other ones, maybe not so much. I mean, Keldon Vandals is great, but the whole idea is, I mean, the reason it's there is because I want to get a counter on it when it comes in, so I don't pay the echo, so it then leaves and comes right back in, and I do it again. But it requires you to be able to play a +1/+1 counter on that specific round. Like, you have to be able to do it, or else you just have to pay the echo or let it die. And, so there's a couple of things that I feel like maybe I have to jump through too many hoops to make them work. So
I would say with Sting Moggy, though, the fact that it targets a land is incalculably valuable.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, you're not going for mass land destruction. Like, you have to pay 4 for it. But to get rid of that pesky Gaia's Cradle, or, even to get somebody to use their strip mine preemptively would be great.
Right.
But that's why Sting Moggy is so great. You turn it to a 1/1 and you get rid of a terrible land. I guess the final question the final card I have a question for is Hell's Caretaker.
Yeah.
3 and a black for a 1/1. It says tap, sacrifice a creature, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only during your upkeep.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's obvious why it's in this deck, because you can essentially get 2 creatures out of the graveyard with it. The one you're sacrificing for it, and the creature you're targeting. Because the first one most likely will be coming back at the beginning of your next end step. Has that last sentence ever really bitten you in the butt?
All the time. All the time. Hell's Caretaker is in there as an emergency backup. Yes, you can tap to sack a creature. So there are times when it's like, oh, the Hell's Caretaker is out and I've just stolen your creature, so I'm going to activate it. But more often than not, it's less about being there to sack a creature so it can loop, and a lot more about that other creature that's already in the graveyard. I really need it back.
Well, yeah. I mean,
And
if you've stolen somebody's creature, you can't activate it because it's almost definitely past your upkeep.
Right. So
it's one of those things that you see out of the corner of your eye and you're like, I'll remember that's there, and then you go to activate and you're like, I can't do this. Whoops.
But right. So it's the emergency backup card, and
right.
Unfortunately, it's also only a 1/1. So if you're using this and it's and it's not for anything particularly exciting, well, okay, I'm going to sack my Solemn, and then return target creature card from my graveyard to the battlefield. The nice part, though, is that the sack a creature part is part of the cost. So
so you can target the thing you're sacking.
Sack the solemn, and then you can return target solemn from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Never thought of that.
You can only do it on your upkeep, which of course means that you can't attack with the creature. There's all kinds of other, and Hell's Caretaker is now tapped for as long as it is possible for a creature to be tapped.
Yeah, you're not using this as a blocker generally.
Well, no, and you're like I said, it's for it's the emergency backup plan. Honestly,
I think the more we talk about it too, I think the more I am sold on it because, like you said, you can target the thing you sack to it, or you're getting 2 for 1 because Marchesa is probably out, or you're getting Marchesa from the graveyard, circumventing the commander tax and kind of getting things back online. And I mean, honestly, the whole thing with sure, it's the upkeep, so your thing doesn't have haste now. Like, the thing you're getting back is probably for the value rather than for attacking, because I mean, this deck doesn't have a lot of attackers.
No, and like I said, that to me, that's one of the difficulties with the deck. It's resilient. It stays in there. As soon as people start swinging at you or doing stuff with creatures, you can usually manage to handle whatever they're throwing at you. As soon as we get off of that form, so if somebody's coming at you from a different angle with direct damage, with mill, with whatever, there's just not a lot you can do at that point because you don't tend to have a lot of ways to just hammer home. I mean, really, when Thraxamundar and possibly a large Deathbringer Thokdar are 2 of your best options, you need more options.
Absolutely.
You just do. So, and this deck needs more options.
That's why you have 8 cards that steal creatures.
Well, yes. And
that's your...
I do my best to maximize that.
Yeah, that's your Jason Alt percentage of scaling or whatever.
Exactly. Thank you, Jason. 75% all the way.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we both know what you need to do with this deck, which is continue to play it because I miss this deck. I haven't played it in a while. Played against it in a while, and I hope next time I play against it, it has some cool new things. And if not, that's fine too. I mean, who am I to judge? But yeah, man, it's a great deck. Huh. I can't believe we haven't talked about it yet, but this is what our eighth deck of yours we've talked about. So maybe next season we'll talk about the other Marchesa one. Who knows? We'll find out then.
We'll see.
We haven't decided yet. Leave us alone. We got 12 weeks before that happens. But
I got lots of decks and other decks to build. So
yeah, you have any final thoughts for us this evening?
Not a whole lot, other than to say yes. I know there's only 39 lands in the deck. And on that note, one of them is also Maze of Ith.
So 38 lands.
When you look at the lands themselves, there are very few basics. This really steps away from my more recent thinking about lands and packing a lot more basics into the pile. However, there isn't a whole lot of search that looks for basics, so that's why I tended to go this way. And I will say, I don't remember the last time that I had a problem with one particular color. So we're in pretty good shape there. And like I said, that ramp package is going to change. And if we're adding more treasures, I can see the any sort of color issues I might be having should be long gone.
As always, we'll have the deck list in the description. But if that's all you got, it's all I got.
That's what I got.
Let's wrap this up. Thank you so much for hanging out tonight. We're a Temple of False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. This has been our deck tale. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Thank you again for listening. Share with your friends, please. We've got 7 more episodes of this fantastic season. and we'll be back next week with a cool topic. That is for sure. So, thank you for listening. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the temple.
Bye!
Wait, before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter at falsepodmtg. Bruce is at Manaburned, and I'm at Andy Weekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, like, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your fifth land be the temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!